Good morning, everybody. My name's Nigel Smith, SWS Certification Services, and my colleague here, Marin Bordas of Weir Engineering. Didn't memorise that one. And we're here to present a summary for the cabin safety side meeting. The main points of discussion were 16G seats, especially around HIC variations, in the context of what level of design changes require a new test, classification of changes involving seat to HIC compliance, the various uses of similarity, component level testing, especially in the context of ARP 6330. Next point was flammability and fire protection. Subject of accreditation of test laboratories and data usage. And we were advised by one of our EASA colleagues that there's information in the upcoming J News for that. There was a lot of discussion around lithium batteries, not just the inherent fire issues, but also around the means of isolation, protection, storage, that sort of stuff. And also the AC 20178 usage on surrogate panels. And again, this is also addressed in the summer version of the J News article. Next was classification of layout of changes. There is a proposed certification memorandum on the classification of design changes in the cabin safety domain. And Marin will explain the action that's come out of that one. There's changes to CS 562 seats will all be major changes with a few exceptions. So that's obviously quite a debate. Also, there was discussion around 365, rapid decompression to be considered, and the applicable requirements, especially in the first class, business class cabin configurations where you have mini suites and other side furniture. Seat installation requirements specific to product types, and that's type certificate holder, frame spec availability. On some annexes to the type certificate data sheets, there is a reference to an Airbus frame spec. I don't think there's any on Boeing, but basically so that we as DOAs can identify where certain information can be held, access to that information and data referenced in the type certificate data sheet, especially areas involving special conditions, being able to gain access to them, equivalent safety findings, and other type certificate holder documents, again, frame specs. One of the concerns brought up is that it's very, very difficult, unless you can get hold of these frame specs, to be able to identify what the in-flight ground and ground loads are.
So the action identified for industry is to develop the industry experience and competence in the context of the LOI to reduce agency involvement on subsequent projects, to assist agency into implementing a level playing field on the classification CM features update by providing cases, to participate and comment NPI and published special conditions, and DOA to provide concise and clear certification programs. What did work well? First of all, the availability of all the concerned EASA experts, the hospitality of the agency, as always. STC and J News is recognized as helpful. EASA plan to include TC holder frame specs extract into TCDS annexes with proper consideration to IP rights. Easy access to regulation and certification specification and possible extension to CRE. Issues encountered. So, the readability of some complex TCDS, So we had an example of Airbus family, but don't be jealous if there are Boeing people here. It's quite the same for Boeing TCDS. So it's difficult to determine the certification basis reading only the TCDS. The TCDS reference data not being easily visible. There are some TCDS without annexes, and some of them are not regularly updated. We had another point on unavailability of TCDS mentioned data. For example, orange paper and some jar documents are not easy to find them. Flight and ground load factors should be added to the TCDS annexes. The use of general notification facilities versus ever-changing EASA site page URL changes, and overall the website user-friendliness could be improved. This is a picture of our group.
Okay. Very much. What I think what is really good from these side meetings, even though you're competitors in business, I think you come together to share your experience. And as you've seen the topics, you all face the same issues and try to find together with us how do you best can address it. And I think that's really one of the real benefits of these side meetings. Coming to the next group, and I have to check my. Yeah, that's the group Airlines, and Dagmar Elton and Peter Dohl from KLM. Please.
Good morning, everyone. Thank you for the opportunity that we can share some thoughts we put together during our side meetings of the airlines. Also, the airlines group was a group I'm attending every year since the beginning, and still there is one person in that group who was also there from the beginning. So it's long time. We are happy to have this group because a lot of discussions were internally to discuss some items we have in our organizations, and we had a very good exchange of issues and praxis. The group is that several airlines, and we sat down and thought about what went well during that group. This open and honest discussions, a good participation, and we changed the agenda several times, so we were quite flexible, like always. We had all experts we need. Thank you for that. And the supporting moderation was very good. Thanks as well. Issues we found out is that we had some items the last years, and there is no follow-up. And we propose that next year in the beginning we would EASA might show us follow-ups from their side, and we can share these items. Yeah, and now I give to Piet.
We discussed several topics. We selected a few of them to make the list not too long. We discussed compliance demonstration by similarity, repair approvals from non-TC holder OEMs, generic repairs, EPA marking, and Form 1 reissue after STC approval. We note that for the compliance demonstration by similarity, that show compliance using similarity as compliance demonstration is very dependent on the type of project that you have. One DOA reported that they got an audit finding by the DOA team leader when using compliance demonstration by similarity, although it was previously accepted by the PCM, where other DOAs use similarity often for compliance demonstration and don't have any problems with that. So we've noted that there is no equal level playing field for all EASA DOAs. Further, we would like to recommend DOAs, especially airline DOAs, to have a library of previous TC holder approvals that can be used as substantiation for showing compliance by similarity for future repairs. The repair approvals from non-TC holder OEMs were discussed. One airline had the topic of an OEM that provided that installed a repair on a component. The OEM was what we call a second level of design authority from the TC holder, so it's like a subcontractor from the TC holder. The previous aircraft owner accepted these repairs. That previous owner was a non-EU operator from a country that had without bilateral agreement with EASA. So it was and when that aircraft was introduced into the EU registration, that it was difficult to accept these designs. So EASA is requested to accept minor changes and repairs from all properly regulated authorities, and not only from USA, Canada, and Brazil, for example, from Singapore. We discussed generic repairs for a type certificate. These are usually developed if damages occur more often to support maintenance. And they are acceptable if the repair is clearly defined with its applicability and limitation. EASA's position is requested for consistency by all DOA team leaders, for example, providing a document within the frequently asked questions.
Our good old friend EPA marking. Well, we discussed lengthily the sense and nonsense of this issue. And we encountered already still a different interpretation of this marking requirements. We just talked about the EPA, the European Parts Approval marking on the parts, not about other marking requirements. We have the opinion that there is no level playing field with FAA, and we do not see increased safety by this requirement, and we would therefore very much request EASA to reevaluate this requirement and to look at the safety benefit of that. Then we had another issue, which is also a lengthy issue. There is on the webpage a good first installation of an STC by a maintenance organization. This is a good practice, which is nice to have. But there is also one point which is nasty, that after all prototype parts which are installed into an aircraft during the prototype STC, first installation of the STC, they are installed with prototype or not approved. And after STC issues, some NAAs ask the maintenance organization that all these parts do have to show a release certificate as approved, which delays the delivery of the aircraft for several days or several weeks. And some we can't get from the States. There is another requirement. And so you will stay here after this conference and cannot go back because the aircraft is sitting on the ground. So therefore we would ask EASA to take a similar approach as the FAA or to find other means to overcome this disadvantage. Yeah, thank you for the opportunity to meet, and this is our group. And have a good day.
Thanks, Peter. Thanks, Dagmar. You had some interesting topics. I think we need to follow up internally. Thanks for raising that. I think that is a good opportunity also for us to see where we can improve and things were not working maybe as they should. Let's see. Okay. Thanks a lot. The next group is the General Aviation Group, and we have Marco Festa, who is going to do the presentation.
Good morning, everybody. I'm Marco Festa from AirPlus company, and I'm here to present the results of the side meeting of the Group 3 about general aviation. We have two main points of discussion. The first point of discussion was the CS23 Amendment 5, the implementation and the exchange of experience. And the second one is the LOI concept implementation inside the general aviation company. The first one, I think, is really interesting because this is the first aircraft level performance safety objective based certification specification of EASA. And we are, let's say, the first one trying to work with that. And we found some issues. The first issue we found is correlation between ASTM and CS23 objective. This is cleared, of course, in the AMC that EASA give to us. But the point is who performs this work of correlation between the requirements, the safety objectives, and the ASTM and the compliance material. We have to change the design assurance system to cope with the new structure of the CS23 because, of course, we have no more performance-based requirement but safety objectives, and therefore we need to define, for example, the responsibility of the company function that makes the translation between the safety objectives and the acceptable means of compliance. That for those who do not know are now the performance-based requirements, more or less. So we have defined the need perhaps to change the design assurance to cope with this new safety-based regulation. The point is also the independent verification of compliance against the applicable ASTM made by the CVE. So should we do the independent verification of compliance with the CVE on the safety objectives and on the ASTM acceptable means of compliance, or only on the safety objectives? Because the point is now, for us, the acceptable means of compliance contains all the technical requirements. Use of different ASTM revision. We discuss also that because especially in the future, we will have the CS23 Amendment 5 that will remain the same and the ASTM revision running up. So in the future, there may be not an issue, but the point to control the ASTM revision in order to understand which ASTM was used for each TCDS. And then for the STC and the changes, the definition of the certification basis and of the means of compliance. Because of course the CS23 will remain the same. What change will be the acceptable means of compliance. And so how we could identify the acceptable means of compliance, perhaps in the certification basis or in the aircraft documentation. The second topic we discussed about was the LOI implementation. It was presented the DOAH policy on the LOI implementation. We review and we discussed the draft certification program template that is on the EASA internet site, that will be on the EASA internet. And we have the implementation of the LOI in practical application. We discuss how to implement that, also taking into account the dimension of the companies that normally are not so big. And so how is more efficient to implement the LOI in small DOAs and small, let's say, small companies that has normally not such a big number of a worthiness engineer. Then the point is benefit versus cost. It's a huge amount of work. Normally, in general aviation company, we have 2 to 3 airworthiness engineer, and it's all work for the airworthiness engineer. So it's really a benefit for lower-end general aviation to have the effort to define the level of involvement and to propose the level of involvements and then to have them accepted, counting also on the fact that normally we work with known PCM, we work sometimes with the NAA people that are still working since 20, 30 years with the general aviation companies. And so we know what they want to see. They know what they want to see from us. So why we have then to make the risk analysis, the safety analysis, just to receive back a feedback that says, well, perhaps no. We want to see what we have seen already in the past for similar projects. And then, what about the Part 21 proportionality in regards to the LOI? So we would be interested to see the proportionality of the Part 21 also in regards, let's say, project-based and connected to the LOI. The action identified, we identify some action on the CS23 Amendment 5. We ask EASA to provide a clear correlation between ASTM and CS23 objectives with also explanation, if possible, of the scope of what they want to see. Because now we just have a number and another number on the side. That's difficult to make interpretation. It's difficult to interpret it. About the LOI implementation, we ask and will be very helpful for us, especially also in, let's say, with the aim of classification, to have the possibility to publish a list of the standard CRE. Not perhaps with the contents, but just a list of EASA with all the requirement that says, here we have a CRE generally on that topic, here we have a CRE generally on that topic, and this is a problem that we think is not only of general aviation, it's a general problem. Because you discover the CRE just after you made the application. And then, in general, we ask EASA to provide more general aviation-related technical trainings and our workshop. We remember a 2017 General Aviation Structural Workshop that was really helpful for us, and therefore we are asking EASA to provide more of this technical training and workshop for the industry, because we think that we can have really an improvement inside our way of working. because it was a really good confrontation with the EASA on technical topic. It was really clear, and we defined the way to proceed on a lot of, let's say, known or unknown issues. What did work well? We have the participation of the right person from EASA for the different topics in agenda, and I want to thank really much EASA for the people that join our group. They give us really a good support, really good technical advices. It was a really good stakeholder mixture, different companies, different experiences to share. So we really exchange a lot of interesting ideas, and it was an open and constructive exchange of experience. We encounter inside the organization basically no issue, and the other things that we want to highlight was already highlighted during the presentation. Thank you very much for your attention.
Thanks a lot.
Thank you.
And the next group is Stefan Boussou and Armin Kaiser. And we mentioned it already yesterday, competence. I think that's quite an interesting topic because we all fight for the same resources to keep competences, to attract competences. And let's see what your discussion brought.
Thank you. Thank you. So it's presented by Frank Kaiser, not Armin Kaiser, which is which was a Frank. Armin Kaiser was a previous PCM. So, the competence, it's a high critical subject. The challenge is that we should ensure the continued competence of people, of the DOA, so that we, at the end, the product maintain the right quality and the right performance. The issue and the difficulty is competence is quite a classic word. There's a lot of definition behind, but there is no unique model for all DOA, and that's the challenge. This is maybe a reason why there is no dedicated guidance. Difficult to promote one recommendation or one model where there is not a one-size-fits-all. So, in addition, all the DOA holders have shown their capacity to manage the competence. They have all qualified people at the right place with the right means. We did not address here with the resource issue, the number of people, which is another problematic. So having said that, why would we need more? Why do we need to discuss about competence? In fact, and the challenge is that we need to prepare the future. We will face a lot of new generation, new people. We lose a lot of experienced people. Then we need to have this transfer of knowledge. We'll have to face with new technology. Are we sure we're competent for the technology of today? Will we be competent for tomorrow? New regulation, which is also an issue. You have seen that we have a lot of new regulation which come into place. For such a new regulation, how could we claim to be competent when we have the first time to deliver the product? So there's a lot of subjects, so we have a lot of topics to discuss, and this is the result. The main point of discussion are, so here it's a lot of subjects, there is a lot of redundancy, but still focusing on competence. The first problematic is how to define the competence. How should we measure it? Should we measure the individual, or is the competence measured through the quality of the deliverable? How to cope with this evolution, the technology, the regulatory evolution, as said previously, or the model should adapt to cope with capacity to measure the competence right first time. We cannot wait 5 years of making a trial to be competent to show the compliance to the first time we have to comply with the change with the new regulation. We have to adjust. Typically the case of the problematic of the cybersecurity. You could be competent today, but you need to adjust your competence so that tomorrow you will still be capable to comply with this regulation. The question also, one of the complexity is how to acquire competence when you do not have it available in-house, whereas it's required. Having a flight test engineer qualified to make CV, yeah, it's an issue. A lot of companies does not have all the competence required for any kind of change, although they are part of a term of approval in terms of capacity. Which kind of competence is required? Okay, we have an assessment when we are making a design change, but here it's, so you must be competent to deliver, get an approval of a change. The next challenge is, with regard to the obligation, you have to secure the continued airworthiness. So you need to be competent today to make a change, but you need to maintain this competence to ensure your obligation for continued airworthiness for 30 years. Are we sure that all of us are capable to maintain this competence for such a long time? And finally, what should be also, when we are dealing with competence, we are dealing also with human resources, so a lot of the soft skill. What should be also the interface between the technical design office and our customer services and the human resource department? Here we must have a strong synergy with the human resource internally to be sure that the recruitment is not limited, or the competence is not limited only on hard skill, on technical skill, but also on soft skill. The soft skill is of good importance. An individual could be very competent, but if he's not well engaged, the deliverable will not be. So, lot of topic, lot of question, not a unique solution. Nevertheless, we still achieve a few conclusions. So a consensus that yes, we have to be careful. Competence is not limited to CV. The first competence that all the DOA have is the capacity to design, not the capacity to make an independent check only. And also, measuring the competence from classroom, solution, through years of experience, of number of projects that each individual has followed, might not be on their own sufficient. Yes, it could be an element, but nevertheless, it's not, as we say, one size fits all, it's not the result. And then, pass to your, the action, so some action identified, yes, because after that I will pass to Frank for the group recommendation, because we speak a lot, but we'll give you a nice recommendation. So we need to develop further guidance or best practice to show that this kind of best practice should be shared to facilitate the DOA management of competence on the topic identified. Here again, as we said at the beginning, there is not a unique model, but nevertheless, the way to manage the competence, the way to maintain this competence can be standardized. And we had a lot of discussion during the side meeting discussion. You will have some backup slide to give you some more detail. And also, we publish a group recommendation. What was good also that we have an EASA, from EASA participation, we have a leader of EASA team working in terms of competence. EASA is working on its own competence modeling, competence assessment, and the first pilot case is on the certification directorate. So here, again, it's for having a measurement of the model of the resource of and competence of the certification directorate. In the industry, we'll face the same problematic, so here we could find synergy. And also, we have an ISD working group, an initiative from the DOA think tank, dealing on working group 13 on competence, which has started. So it's still not finished. We are just at the beginning to assess. We came together. We are at the middle of a river. And this year, in 2020, the objective is to deliver this preliminary draft. So many people who want to share the experience or to join the group is welcome. And then finally, the gift, the group recommendation. So I'll leave the floor to Frank for the final slide.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Well, thank you, Stefan. We chose to do a dual presentation because we had a group, diverse group. Stefan representing his company Airbus, but of course also the larger group. There were also smaller DOAs, some even one with a
one head of design who was the expert and some engineers with a lot less competence. So we decided to have also the view of the smaller DOAs represented in this competence discussion. We had a little trouble getting, in the morning at least, getting the question on the table. What is the direction that we want to discuss? And that's also, I think, representative for the competence topic. It's a very large, broad topic where everybody is probably struggling with. Also good to know is that it is mostly industry that is driving this discussion. It is not EASA who is asking for more competence. As Stefan said, the DOAs are approved. They have competent people. We have to assume all that. But industry itself is feeling that there needs to be attention to develop further or at least maintain competence in the future. Competence, we have not been able in this meeting to define very strict criteria. So a new regulation defining competence is not something we are looking for. Checklist guidance, I think it's very important for each DOA to define its own scope of work and the subsequent competence that goes with it. And I think repeating the concerns that Stefan discussed led us to a few recommendations. And I think each of you needs to consider your own DOA, not for today, but for tomorrow, for the future. What is going to happen with my resources? Are my experienced people, my competent people, how long will they be able and willing to stay in the company? And are they able to provide their competence? So what is your loss of experienced people prediction? That's about people, all the experienced people. But what happens normally is that you also, if your company is doing well in continuity, you're hiring new people, you're getting younger people on board with not yet the experience of your older people. So how do you get competence transferred into those new people? Training, as you mentioned, is not, it's a means, but it's not the only means. It's getting exposure, it's teaming with younger and older people, all kinds of things you can think about. So think about how you want to do that. Then we also see very competent DOAs, but suddenly there's new technology coming on board. So even the experienced people need to go back and learn about new technologies and try to establish and create their competence. So that's another axis of concern. And then, of course, we all see sometimes new regulations come on board. And I think this room here with 500 people, we are all trying to be more competent on new regulations. And I can refer to the OSD discussions of the past and the LOI discussions we have today. We all try to understand how to apply those new regulations. Higher complexity, data information overflow, certainly also true. I think you also see that companies are under pressure to do more work with less people. So that's also a concern to take into account. Is your system, your DOA, your design assurance system robust enough for that? So this is the final slide. I think it was very good to have the diversity in the group. A lot of discussion, big companies, small companies, mature companies, newer companies. That worked very well. We had to establish understanding of each other's problems. We shared the topics of discussion already early on. 1 or 2 weeks ago, we already communicated about how we wanted to have the discussion, and that helped a lot, I think, to bring some structure and order in the day. We had very good active participation of industry, but also EASA representatives were very active in the discussion and helping us to find some way out of the topic. So this is the team that we had, and we had a fun day. Thank you.
Thanks, Frank, not Armin. Sorry for that.
I'm Frank.
And I think what is really good what was also mentioned here, that we work together, we face the same problem. We are involved in, for example, the ASD group on competences, and I think that shows that we identified similar topics and have the same issues to tackle. The next group, Stefan, you want to go through the whole room? The next group discussed continued airworthiness, and I have a list of 4 names: Dieter Stege, Mario Pirozzi, Alistair Erskine, and Ilko Baker. That's the wrong presentation. Should be group. Oh, sorry. Sorry, can you go back to the presentation? My mistake. Yes, Paul Condy and Sebastian Bruckmeier on ETSO. Sorry for that. My mistake. But at least I managed you to get up and make your way to the stage, huh? Listening to the authority. Yes. If you want to. Sebastian.
Oh, so many people here. Oh. Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. My name is Sebastian Bruckmeier, and I'm representing Aviation, who is designing and producing air cargo pallet nets and cargo restraint straps. And together with my colleague Paul from Trick Avionics, being involved in the development of avionics equipment, I have the pleasure to highlight for you the most interesting topics which we have addressed during the site meeting. So this is a short list of participants, which was quite good that we had different participants from different disciplines. So from mechanical and structural side, like seat manufacturers, but also developers of avionic equipment, and also for our cargo equipment like containers and cargo tie-down equipment. So the main points we have discussed during the site meeting have been ETSO change classification in general, so major versus minor changes, the topic which was most interesting for us, for example, was the effects you could have if you're introducing cumulative minor changes to a certain design. Further point was ETSO as minimum performance standard. So if you have, for example, introduced non-ETSO functions to an ETSO article, that could be used, for example, in the military sector, and the further EASA involvement on such equipment. We're also talking about installation requirements which have been newly introduced to certain ETSO standards, so for example for seats. The absolutely most important and interesting topic for us was DOA mandatory for certain ETSO beyond APU. I will come to that afterwards. Quite a scaring topic. And we were talking about bilateral agreements and validation, especially about the EASA and the technical implementation procedure status with the CAAC from China, and what's the status on that. So, Paul, your turn.
Thanks, Sebastian. Morning, everyone. So as Sebastian said, one of the main topics that we discussed in the morning was the change classification between minor and major changes for ETSO articles. There were certain interesting examples, especially from the seatbelt and seat manufacturers who hold ETSOs on their products, that if they introduce a minor change at the product level, then what is the effect of that change at the higher level, perhaps at an aircraft level? Should extra tests be performed? Because that could be a major change. There is also something more for information and a point to note that if we hold the ETSO and make a number of minor changes, say perhaps 5, 10, 15, then after 15, what is the thing that you have in your hand? Is it still the same ETSO? At some point, have you moved on to a major change on that article? The second area that we discussed and identified was the minimum performance standards. The first one should be well known, that non-TSO functions at the moment, EASA verify that there is no negative effect on the TSO function. This is particularly true with my colleagues from the avionics industry, where perhaps their ETSO product can be used for a military client, and maybe some extra features are there, but these features at the moment must not have a negative effect on the ETSO function. One recommendation from industry to consider was the introduction of more CREs and SCs into the certification basis for the ETSO article. There is perhaps some benefit that if we increase the amount of testing at the ETSO article stage, then that gives a better certification coverage when you come to the installation stage of the product.
So now coming to the topic, DOA mandatory for certain ETSOs beyond APU, where I told you this was absolutely the most scaring topic for us addressed during the site meeting. So what does it mean? It means that EASA will probably come up with a new requirement where a DOA, other than an AP DOA, would be mandatory for certain ETSO standards. This could affect, for example, complex equipment. So if we're talking about avionic equipment, for example, but it could also affect, let's say, simple equipment whose failure would have a potential hazardous or catastrophic effect on aircraft level. So it could be avionic equipment on the one side, but on the other side, it could be even our cargo equipment, which is quite simple design, but its failure effect could have could be hazardous or catastrophic on aircraft level. So this would be will be covered under rulemaking task 0727, which is already in place. And we really kindly ask all industry participants which would be potentially affected by this, or ETSO holders, to really give their comments on that when the notice for proposed amendment will be issued. This will be in the first quarter of 2020. So we really ask you to participate in that and to give your comments on that in order to set a clear borderline, what is complex, what is non-complex, and for what you need to have a DOA in place for which ETSOs. So then about the bilateral agreements, we talked about the bilateral agreement, or the TIP, which is being in process with the CAAC. Yesterday in the presentation we heard already that there will be no automatic acceptance for ETSO in China. So in both ways there will be no automatic acceptance. However, it is good that there will be a streamlined validation process. So we heard also yesterday in the presentation that it will not take longer than 3 to 5 weeks once you applied for validation of your ETSO in China. So it's good to have such a streamlined validation process. We further addressed the potential problem that in China for CTSO you have a 2 years validity only. This is not in place in EASA. If you have an ETSO, there is no limited validity for your ETSO. So EASA told us that they are facing the issue how to address that topic and how to handle this. However, this topic was not clarified yet because EASA is still working on this, how to handle that in future. We were also talking about the relation between EASA and US. So this is not new. However, we talked about it, that if you have an ETSO article that was modified in the US and becomes a PMA, that the ETSO approval of this article is no longer valid. So the ETSO approval of this article is being invalidated, and that the ETSO holder is then further no longer responsible for this modified ETSO article anymore. So further, we talked about that the tip between EASA and US gives you a provision of using FAA type, FAA TSO as certification basis. This was really a good point that was addressed. This means if you have an FAA TSO where you have a newer version, revision in place than the equivalent EASA ETSO, that you could apply for approval by using the FAA TSOs as certification basis. And later on, if EASA would issue the equivalent new version of the EASA ETSO standard, you could then, via minor change only, validate this or approve this for ETSO. So what did work well for us for the site meeting? It was a really good organization, thanks to EASA for that. So we received regular updates for the site meetings. Which was also very good was that we received a survey, all participants, where we could choose and select the topics that are most interesting for us, which we would like to discuss during the site meeting. It was also very good to have several different EASA experts attending the meeting. So when we were discussing about different sectors, mechanical structure, avionics, cargo, that we had the respective expert from EASA attending the meeting. And as I said already, we had a good cross-section of different disciplines in regards to participants and representing persons. Proposals. It would be good to have more industry representatives participating in such meetings. So we have been a rather small group, unfortunately. So we think it would be better to have much larger groups because then you can get much more feedback from the industry. Furthermore, it was identified by several group participants that other days than Monday or Friday are preferred due to traveling, etc. And we also identified that it would be a good idea to potentially also include TC holder representatives to such meetings in order to address, on one hand, the requirements to certify a product or equipment, but on the other hand, to also identify the customer needs. So thank you very much for your attention. This was our group. Thank you.
Thanks, Paul. Thanks, Sebastian. I think the one with China and the 2-year validity, we identified that already, and we are trying to discuss it with the Chinese in the tip, whether this can be eliminated like all the other tips that you have in constant. But this is something that really depends on the Chinese, and we have to see how this will develop. Oh. And it's interesting to see that, for example, the ETSO group asks that TC holders also join the discussions, because for sure there's an interface that you need to address. And I think we can learn a bit how to organize things and how to better have the discussions balanced and taking all things into account. The next group, and this time I think I get it right, is for STCs. And it's Stephen Tiernan and Franz Redak who will do the presentations. Okay.
Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. My name is Franz Redak, Stephen Tiernan. and in ghost here, Fred Steenbergen, in spirit. He's here today, and he volunteered to present all this, but then had a good excuse not to be here. So we had to take over on short notice. Thank you very much. One statement to Rob. Is Rob here? Rob Bersma? Is he here? Okay, he promised us to have a speaker badge. That's the only reason why I committed to volunteer to have a talk today. I have not received it yet. Okay, fair enough. Yeah, our topic was STCs, and the companies obviously in our group were all representatives of DOAs preparing STCs and minor changes on certain aircrafts and products. Here is the list of persons attending this meeting. Thank you very much at the first for all of them and their contribution to the presentation, and also with the kind support of the three persons from EASA, Rob Bersma, Raphael Aubert, and Nicolas Dupré. All of them attended, not all of them permanently, but at least to a certain extent, our meeting and contributed in with valuable inputs. Right. The 5 topics we wanted to highlight out of a number of them. I should say that we had a rather large list to start with, and some of them were identified as not being necessarily part of our group discussion. Some others were defined as regulatory topics, which would be appropriately covered in the presentations from EASA during this 2 days. But these ones here are the kind of short list of our topics. We discussed the occurrence reporting database, LOI experience sharing, as far as we had experience with it, special condition and certification review items, availability to the applicants. And I've seen that in another presentation already, so it seems to be a common issue. And importance of clear type certification basis definition in the type certification data sheet, and operational suitability data. That were the topics, and this is what I would like to present now. On the occurrence reporting database, well, the topic was that one of our colleagues brought up that we are kindly required to provide occurrence reports in case of technical or safety-related findings. And we seem to also, within a design organization, we seem to have an obligation to evaluate such occurrences and incidents, not only limited to our own designs and our own work, but also in regards to industry knowledge, in the kind of introducing that knowledge into our design and trying to make our things better based on knowledge and findings in the past, and hopefully before such occurrence would appear to ourselves and to our design. So we were kindly asking whether EASA plans to make those data collected through the IORS system available to the DOAs to meet their obligation of 239A, where it says that we have to monitor and identify significant events on other aeronautical products as far as relevant to determine their effect on airworthiness or operational suitability of products being designed by the design organization. So that means we want to learn from these information we provide you, but we want to have it anonymized, provided to us so that we could appropriately take care about them and consider it with our own design. All right, that was the first topic, and now here comes Stephen.
Good morning. So LOI experience sharing, that was actually the first item that was on the list, as you can imagine at the moment. So I'm going to jump around on the topics we discussed a bit, not in the order, they're on the screen there. From the group, the main makeup of it, I think most of us are currently implementing LOI procedures, and there was a small number who had already working under the LOI process. The main takeaway from those guys was really to keep the process flexible. If you introduce a rigid procedure, the effectiveness of identifying risks is lost. You know, for example, in your CDI, you may end up with items that are a higher risk than other items, and then you don't truly identify the risks because you get driven by the higher risk items. So really, it's flexibility, even to the point that one organization had changed the way they made their groupings in each STC project they'd done up to that date. So it was basically what works best for each project that you do. And at the end of the day, as long as you can ensure the groups are meaningful, then that should be accepted. Beyond that, the risk assessment becomes quite easy. You follow the guidance material, the AMCs, there's the CM 21A, 21B, these are all available online. And then the CT6 policy from the DOA, you can get that from your DOA team leader, you won't be able to find it on the website. For the discussion on the position of the airworthiness, the Office of Airworthiness, there were some different ideas. I think the main consensus was that the LOI process is really a job that the Office of Airworthiness will lead. The involvement of CVEs is not necessary, but then again, some organizations were involving CVEs, and that is really a decision that you can make. It's not really required if you don't want to do that. The action from this was a clearer definition of what requirements are covered by which panel or panels. For example, 571 under panel 3, we appreciate some CS requirements will have multiple panels. And I believe this actually already exists internally in EASA, and so that may be disseminated amongst the organizations as a helpful guide.
Yeah, the next one was special conditions certification review items and the availability to applicants for STCs in this case here. I think I remember at least a half dozen times we brought that topic up, that to an applicant it is essential that we have all the criteria available at the time when we do a major minor classification, because it's our obligation and we're willing to take that obligation. However, we are missing some important information, and that is in this case the certification review items or special conditions, however you want to call it, which are to a certain extent not available. I would say to a large extent not available. They are available for a very short period of time as a proposed certification review item, but then they disappear from the EASA website because they are dealt with between the applicant and EASA individually. We as STC applicants are not necessarily in the position to check on a daily business or monthly business all the certification review items which may be out. And I want to add that proposed certification review items may not be the wording of the final certification review item. So in the end, we don't know about it. And I think that is agreed that topics which are covered by a certification review item must be classified as major, and therefore we need to know them. So it's important, essential to us to have these certification review items available, even though it is only in a generic way. We agree and we accept that there are some intellectual property included in some of these certification review items, but I believe it is acceptable to us to have a certain generic wording which we need to know in order to comply with the regulations. So we also appreciate and we recognize that the EASA was working quite strongly on covering this topic on at least product level, with providing annexes to the type certificate data sheet. We appreciate that. That is well done, and it's still continued to be updated. We appreciate that. That's very helpful. However, we would like you to progress down to 5.7 tons and not stay with above 100 tons aircraft. Yeah, the action to EASA would be, could the EASA invest in continuing the processes on the type certificate datasheet annexes and also on standalone crews, such as for fire extinguishers, for whatever else, software topics, etc. We would like you to do that. Thank you very much.
So this next one, I won't spend too much time on it because I know some of the previous groups have touched on this. Again, it's the identifying the type certification basis from the TCDS. Now, I don't mean to pick on Airbus again, but the A320 was mentioned again as a shared experience when we've all come to identify the type certification basis. Lots of variants, and you're reading down through the type certificate, it becomes very difficult to actually identify what is the type certification basis. Really, the action out of this was, and there's not much to say beyond that, is that we would request that EASA improve the readability of the type certification data sheets, making it easier for us to actually identify the certification basis.
So, last not least, operational suitability data was discussed. The participants identified difficulty to appropriately apply OSD on projects due to lack of feedback from EASA. And not because EASA is not willing to do that, but simply because we believe it's a minor OSD change, therefore EASA is not involved in it. So we would wish to have kind of a contact identified within EASA to contact him on a short notice and ask him specific topics, because obviously OSD is a new topic to us to a certain extent. Then we also discussed that the conditions under which an LOI is not provided to an operator, although the regulation says you should provide LOI constituents to the operator, we believe there are certain arguments and topics existing not to provide such OSD, specifically here about MMEL, to operators and or provide them only on a charge basis. So it's not part of the STC, but it can be used and amended to the STC. The question to EASA is, could EASA provide some real case example of FCD and cabin crew data changes to support the understanding of these topics? That was identified by some of us. And the other question was, do OSD changes or the OSD constituents we provide and develop need to be identified in the STC document? And if that is a yes, does it apply to major and minor OSD? Okay, we would like to be interested in that. And that concludes our presentation. And we thank you very much for your attendance.
Franz, we got a question about CVE involvement in LOI was optional. Can you, maybe that was the understanding from one of the slides.
Yeah.
Maybe you can explain a bit.
The topic was such that we believe that an LOI, first of all, is a relief to the operator. So that means that not providing an LOI to a certain extent is acceptable. It's certainly safe because it means that if the equipment has any failure indication or any other anomaly, it will ground the aircraft. So by definition, that is safe. So we believe that for certain optional installations specifically, okay, non-required installations with cockpit controls, that we could identify such OSD constituents as an optional a giveaway to an operator, rather than, as the regulation says, it must be provided.
Okay, interesting. I think that needs to be further discussed.
Okay. Okay.
I think it's quite interesting to learn from the discussions and the feedback and the actions identified where you see need for improvement. And I discussed with Alain already, there are quite a number of points where we have to see how we could better address the points. And sometimes we're also surprised why these topics are raised in the first place. We thought everything should be clear, but maybe not clear enough. So I think it's really valuable to have these feedback sessions from the side meetings. And maybe one comment when we do the survey at the end of this conference, please provide also your comments on the side meetings, maybe how to better organize them, how to improve them. I think that's really helpful. So coming to the next group, Independent System Monitoring, and we have Sega Özdemir and Rizeri Makato who will do the presentation. Thank you.
Good morning. My name is Sega Özdemir. I am the head of Independent Monitoring Function in Turkish Aerospace. Today, with my colleague Mr. Marcato from Embraer, we would like to share our feedbacks from the site meeting Group 7 Independent System Monitoring, called ISM. As representatives of ISM functions of the aviation sector, last year we had the first chance to come together in a site meeting of EASA. It was our first opportunity and we would like to thank for this to EASA. Like last year, this year's topics were very fruitful. The outcome of the site meeting was very fruitful, and there were too many up-to-date topics of the DOA community trying to find the best practices and the way forward for the ISM functions. The first topic was the ISM role in DOA performance. And we continued our discussions with the ISM experience with auditing of LOI processes. How to use digitalization in ISM activities was also another interesting topic. And we concluded our discussions with the ISM role in control of design suppliers. ISM role in DOA performance. As we have seen in yesterday's presentations of EASA, a new systematic has been introduced to the sector called the DOA dashboard, showing the DOA performance of the design organizations. And ISM performance was one of the core elements of this dashboard. And as a working group 7, we have concluded that ISM is a foundation for EASA DOA oversight. Because, for example, in LOI process, similarly, a prerequisite is a good ISM to be put in place. ISM has an appreciable effect on the final decision. And in order to satisfy these requirements, we need to go far beyond the auditing as a means of like scorecard systematic, ad hoc investigations, and also sample checks. This means we will act proactively. While making this or performing this acting proactively, a risk-based approach should be used to focus our resources. Regarding the internal follow-up, all the design organizations should strengthen the value of ISM in their organization. This is really, really critical. ISM experience in auditing LOI processes. We all know that LOI is a relatively new concept for the sector. So like all the other stakeholders, the ISM functions should have the basic knowledge, maybe trainings on LOI processes before monitoring them. Besides, we should use the competences, the necessary competences within our organizations, like CVs. We may use the CVs in our independent system monitoring activities in order to point out the non-compliances in a more effective way. Another important input will be also from the EASA feedbacks. Now I am leaving the stage to my colleague Markoto for the remaining topics. Thank you.
Hello. So we are going to talk a little bit about the ISM and the digitalization. It's growing exponentially within the design organization, even in EASA, as we saw yesterday. And we discussed a lot about the role of the ISM in this process. And since the ISM needs to monitor the design organization working, and we see that the information systems can help the ISM on its whole, since it increases its capacity to explore the data generated during the design organization activities. Even we can manage to create some tools that allow us to avoid the non-compliances in the critical tasks of the design organization. Another issue that we discussed was the ISM role in the control of design suppliers. So we need to establish with the design organization a clear interface with the design supplier in order to create a efficient monitoring activity. Because sometimes we face some issues regarding intellectual property, and this should be clearly addressed on the agreements that we have with our suppliers. This agreement can be a contract or even a design organization interface document. And also we can try to address on this agreement this gray zone that we have between the manufacturing and design data, because ISM is concerned to the design data, but sometimes the understanding of what is design data and manufacturing data clashes, and we need to have it the clearest way in the contract or in the design and organization interface document. The delegation of the ISM tasks to the supplier is possible, but the design organization approval holder must have in mind that the responsibility for the independent system monitoring remains with the design organization that's delegating the function. So the issues we encountered during our side meeting is the size of the DOA matters a lot for this subject of the ISM function. LOI, as an example, is not a core issue for all the DOAs. The DOAs that deals on their daily business, mostly with minor changes and minor repairs, doesn't have a lot of chances to exercise the LOI, since they just do the minor approvals. And the ISM is very important for them to establish the connection with the EASA, and it is from where comes most of their performance assessment. Working Group 7, the ISM group, agrees that is a function that's having its responsibility within the DOA increasing each day, and we as an industry must follow up better the ISM. And one action that we identified for the industry, and the industry requesting to EASA, is to create a training on ISM best practice and expectations, and also to put in public consultation the DOAHs of electronic type, design data and record keeping system, and use of digital signature, in order to us to have a minimum standard for where we can go on the digitalization, and the clarification on the DOA performance, including the ISM performance. The industry action that we at the side meeting group will try to start, and then to involve all of you ISM functions in the next step, is to organize networking sessions facilitated by EASA, since our side meeting hostess offered to help us to do these sessions, because we think that the industry needs to discuss more the ISM function in order to make it improve. So, almost concluding, what did you work well? We are seeing that the interest on independent system monitoring is increasing each year. The side meeting is a very good open discussion platform. Some of us were talking about having one more day of side meetings, but it's not a defined idea yet. We had a very good team spirit with the people at our side meeting, moderated by Bulent and Francesco. Very good moderating. It was a good time with what we see, a good outcome. That was our team. And we'd like to thank you for the opportunity to share this ICM topic with you. Thank you.
Thanks a lot. And I think the ISM group is quite a good example, because we started it, I think, last year the first time, but the group throughout the year met at least once or twice independently from the workshop because they thought the topics are so interesting and need to be addressed in a continuous manner. And I think we can facilitate this, but it's you, industry, that should be the driver and have an interest in this. And I think also some others mentioned it for their groups. You would like to have a more constant discussion on certain topics, and not only once per year during these side meetings or this annual conference. And we can help you to organize these things, but you must be the driver behind it. And with that, we come to the last group, and now it's the right one, continued aversiveness. So Dieter, Mario, Alistair, and Ilko, can you please come to the stage? Thanks.
Good. Hello to everybody. It's a bit unfair to us, of course, to stand up earlier, but now being already in the break, we try to keep it short. We've got as a team the pleasure to give you the debrief of this side meeting number 8 about continued airworthiness. And Marcus said earlier, something appears to be very clear, and it ends up as maybe not as clear as it should be. This is also one of the final conclusions I could already draw. My name is, as I said, Dieter Steg, and I will start with the first topic here. I haven't got an introduction. It works. We will go into 4 specific topics. Keep in mind, yes, it was a good host from EASA. We got Ian there, and Carmen and Marcus. But the main topic was to share
experience, to share problems from the participants. And as we were diverse as the other teams, obviously, we ended up in talking about topics very often without the solution. So we can draw some of the topics without providing the solution. I will start with the first point of events occurring in maintenance. And I was asked to explain here, to say, when some occurrences appear worldwide somewhere, for instance, in that particular case, as reported by our colleague in the maintenance, and it appeared as a human error failure, there are some still expectations inside industry, but also inside DOA teams, that there's a responsibility within the design organization to rectify, to provide design changes. I think we are all common in the term foolproof design, but how far maybe is this expectation supporting the safety? Where is really the handover from the responsibility point of view, being in the design organization or being somewhere in the maintenance area? Therefore, it was one of our conclusions to say, when we talk about occurrences and when we talk about providing technical solutions, we quite often need more clarity, coming back to the term, more clarity about handshakes, communication, not only from the EU, but also with other foreign countries and their legislation system. So, as I said, just one topic. Therefore, I hand over now to the next, which is, there's another slide. Mario.
Morning, my name is Mario, most popular plumber, Super Mario. My brother's name is Luigi. Ciao Luigi. I have to say hello also to my mom. Ciao mama, ciao papa. But I cannot forget my wife. You know, otherwise I cannot come back at home. Ciao Annalisa. Okay. Don't worry, Didier. Don't worry, Didier. I become so professional like you. Okay, like German. Okay. I prepared and shared with them a slide introducing this topic that is not so easy topic. I put on the left side the continued airworthiness and on the right side the accident, serious incident investigation. And I put in the middle a border, a red line showing that the two processes are quite separated, no? On the left side, you have something that is relevant for Part 21. On the right side, that is not under the DOA perimeter, no? But at a certain time, there is a connection, okay? When we are aware that there is an unsafe condition, then we receive input from the investigation body to open an occurrence, okay? That was not so clear to everybody, so we think that it is necessary to clarify the perimeter, no? We need to clarify when we have to involve EASA, at which stage, considering the investigation body, and considering that EASA in principle cannot participate to the serious incident investigation. So finally, we think that probably it is better to go deeper on this and to highlight that the two processes are anyway separated. Thank you.
Yeah. So thank you, Super Mario. Now, on a different subject, we discussed repairs approved by the FAA and in the EASA system. We had a talk with a client of us. I work for ADZ, and they said, well, when I have my repair approved by a DER, it's much more easier and simpler. We had a discussion in the group whether or not that is true. We ended up in saying, okay, we live in a different part of the world. We live in another set of regulations. So we're not going to discuss that here. But there are tiny differences, and probably the International Working Group has identified that. And Frank Steffen said yesterday very clearly that the task of the Certification Oversight Board is actually to ensure a global level playing field for European industry. Now they added a note when a repair is coming from the FAA or is approved under the FAA system, is coming into the EASA system. And that's just a little note under the 3 requirements to which a repair has to comply to when it's accepted in the EASA system. And that note says that a minor repair, has to go through an EASA Part 21 before being implemented. Now, I don't know, but our organization is under the impression that this note is there, so there is something to say to the organization implementing those repairs, but we're not under the impression that it's really followed. It could be made more clear, this note. So that's my advice for the EASA. Okay?
Good morning. I think one of the first topics we talked about was what actually constitutes the instructions for continued airworthiness. And the great takeout, I think, was that it was unclear. We had representatives, smaller, larger DOAs, from airlines, from TC holders, and the room was divided really as what constitutes the ICA. In particular, I think IPC was mentioned. Is that ICA or does it sit outside of ICA? And the consensus ultimately was that anything that would otherwise be in the AMM by virtue of Appendix H and hence required to ensure the continued airworthiness, that any document, no matter where you put that information, if it should otherwise have been in an AMM, would still be ICA. It seems an important part to discuss, first of all, and it still seems vague, but obviously we know from the presentations that EASA also is looking at it with the NPA 2018-01. So thank you for that presentation yesterday as well. Clearly, there is still some misunderstanding. So, we also discussed how the FAA and the EASA do differ, certainly with the readiness of ICA and when that should be delivered relative to the C of A of the aircraft. I think most people understood that that is a difference that is still there, and we live with it. I think that's about it for the ICA constituents. Thank you.
Last but not least, I've got the pleasure, with the support from the team, to go now into a subject which is, from my point of view, at least a kind of conclusion from the site meeting. And allow me, please, some minutes to share a presentation which I had given into the team at the site meeting as a kind of stimulation for discussion. What did I do? I said, out of a training session I typically give in the company, to share my understanding of clarity. Marco said earlier, clarity. It's an assumption quite often. Is it really clear to everybody? Talking about terminologies, what is continued airworthiness? And I want to start left-hand side to say, are we all clear what is state of design? Michelle, you worked in that area of ICAO, so all the ICAO Annex 8 airworthiness of aircraft is the basis of our work. So to design something, the type certificate here is just representing, of course, any type of approval, but under the responsibility of the state of design, so purpose-driven. ICAO is saying, the Annex 8 is saying, that process shall lead and ensure that compliance with the applicable airworthiness requirements is ensured of that particular state, granting the TC or the approval. There's an obligation to the state of design to transmit, and I've re-emphasized, to transmit the instructions, those instructions mandatory for the continuing airworthiness of an aircraft in operation. These are not my terms, these are the terms out of the ICAO Annex 8. Giving the type design data or any other approved data into the hands of the state of manufacture is now in handover in ultimate responsibility. So this responsibility given from the state of design into the state of manufacture should be visible to everybody, because this is a kind of communication tool. So granting data with a clear statement, is it approved, covered by TC, STC, whatever, or non-approved design data, makes later on the continuing airworthiness aspects different. Therefore, the term airworthy and certification in total could be seen, is seen as the initial airworthiness, very often used as a term. And the status of an aircraft, as it's said here, is the question aircraft engine or propeller, so our parts topic, our product topics, to make sure it approves to the approved design data and is in a condition of safe operation. And now we come to the point which was subject of the site meeting mainly. Now we are facing the real world of operation, where the safety applies. Safety means there's a risk either eliminated or mitigated and under control to an acceptable level, acceptable to what we declare the state of registry. Therefore, the task, the performance, the measures, the tools, the regulations are applicable from that state. And although it seems quite simple, and keep this please as a simple chart, and again, I re-emphasize, these are words you find in this ICAO Annex 8, I can assure you, but these are indicating a simple left to right approach. But what we as businesses need is now the multi-layer condition. Because we are multinational, we are embodied in a very complex situation, in a global world. So state of design is one aspect, but state of design could be different for the aircraft, could be different for the engine, could be different for the STC. The same is in manufacture. We all have, I guess, suppliers somewhere in the world. And ultimately, this was a site meeting to say, what does it mean into the continuing airworthiness facet? So thanks for sharing this view. My plea is now, whenever we do the regulations, updates, so rule-making activities, or even in sharing conferences, my plea is to have always a kind of line of sight back to the original known communication means established by ICAO. What are we serving for by implementing rules, by explaining rules, by having answers for the DOA team leaders? Is it now an activity under the state of design? Is it a supporting activity for a foreign country? Keep in mind, 191 states are currently registered in the ICAO. Therefore, the operational situation which we as a TC holder shall support does vary significantly across the world. I don't want to disturb you any longer, so thanks for providing me with the time. I hope you enjoyed it. Thanks for your attention.